In this episode, we're talking about human resources with an expert in the field. All this and more coming up on The Perfect Route. Welcome to the show, everybody in podcast land. I'm Dr. Bill Sodeman, and I'm so pleased to have Sheila Eason with me today. How are you, Sheila?
I'm doing great, Bill. Thank you.
You're welcome. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, Sheila?
Yes. So I have spent the last 30 years of my career as HR practitioner, and now I'm doing HR consulting. And so I've kind of combined my experiences with HR, L&D, recruiting, and all of those things into now consulting with organizations to help them to create stronger and healthier cultures. I do a lot of training with organizations to train their leaders. And I'm also an executive coach as well. So, again, I've combined all of my experiences into now what I'm doing right now to really work with organizations.
Okay. And we've got a lot in common. Frequent visitors to this podcast remember that I'm an executive coach and I've also got a background in adult education, especially corporate training. So lots to dig into today.
Yes, I'm
Looking
ready.
forward to it. So, what pulled you into the world of human resources in the first place?
It's interesting because I never started out thinking I'm going into human resources. That wasn't my major in college. But what pulled me into it is my first job after I graduated with my bachelor's degree from Bowling Green State University was as a hall director. I was a hall director at a residence hall on campus, a residence hall of 250 young men. And with that experience, I managed a team of resident advisors. I managed the staff at the front desk, and I had overall responsibility for really managing the entire residence hall. And so I dabbled into various aspects of HR. I had to give feedback, I had to do performance reviews. And then from there, my job, once I finished my coursework in my master's degree, my first job was as an EEO coordinator at one of our local major hospitals. And so that for those who are not familiar with that terminology, is equal employment opportunity coordinator. And I was housed in the HR department. So I had a lot of exposure to what the HR generalists did and the recruiters and other areas. And so I dabbled in that a little bit and I really took a liking to it. And so from those experiences, I really determined that this is what I want to do because I really liked helping people and really solving problems. So that was my journey.
And thanks for giving us an overview of where you started and how your career has progressed. I'm a big believer in continuous improvement and trying to frame opportunities as positive ways to affect change. So I can very much appreciate where you're coming from.
Yes, yes.
You work pretty closely with executives, managers, and HR leaders across several industries. What things are you seeing that are shaping the future of leadership in HR right now?
Well, I think number one, what we're hearing a lot about right now is AI, how AI is shaping the future of HR organizations. I believe that organizations that don't adapt to AI are going to have some trouble keeping up with the time. So I think that is one of the things that's shaping. I also think that leadership development is also shaping organizations and specifically leadership communication. I think that organizations that are really spending time to help their leaders to become better communicators are on the forefront of taking their organizations to the next level. Those are just a couple of the things that I'm seeing, but specifically the leadership development, also coaching. I think that is also one of the areas that is shaping HR is, helping leaders within organizations become better people managers. Because throughout my career, one of the areas that I've seen leaders in particularly struggle the most is in managing people. I think what often happens, what I've seen in my career is that individuals are promoted because of their technical competence. They do very well as an IT professional, an individual contributor. And then because of that, they're then promoted into a leadership position, but they're not provided with the support or the resources, the training, the know-how to be able to lead people. And so they stumble and fall because again, they know the world of IT, for instance, but they don't know how to communicate with people.
Mhm. And that's one area that, executive coaches like, yourself and myself can really help because the technical skills and the domain knowledge that got you promoted doesn't necessarily prepare you for the shift in the ways that you lead, communicate, and think strategically. It's a big shift.
It's a huge shift. And I think that organizations do their employees a disservice when they don't understand that. So when they say, "Hey, John is a really great IT manager," or "Sally is a really great accountant. And so let's put her into this position. I'm sure she'll be great." And they fail to realize those skill sets are very, very different. Being able to, do accounting is great, but being able to communicate with people, it's a very, very different skill set. And so again, just like you said, executive coaches like us, we understand that. And so our job then is to help organizations to make that transition, to make that leap to understanding that gone are the days where we can just put people into leadership positions because they're good at their job. Those days are
Mhm.
way behind us.
Yeah, that's a big shift, and in some ways, it can stifle leadership development. In other ways, it's a great opportunity for leadership development to happen.
Absolutely. Yes, it's a great opportunity. And I also think that it helps with employee engagement because when employees recognize that my company is investing in me, they're vested in my development and they're willing to offer me an executive coach or to send me to training to help me to develop my skills, the employees are more committed to those organizations because again, they feel as though the organization is vested in them. It's a win-win on both sides.
Yes, yes, and that perception of investment from the organization is key to helping get the buy-in from an employee, manager, or executive.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think also, Bill, the other thing that most leaders, executives understand is the bottom line. And I think that once individuals like you and I, executive coaches, leadership development experts, when we can help them to understand how developing their leaders, providing them with coaching improves the bottom line, then it even a greater sale. And what I mean by that is if providing someone with an executive coach helps them to improve their employee retention by, let's say, 2%. Well, if you look at the numbers and let's say that 2% equates out to a $50,000 savings, then those executives, that C-suite, they understand that. They understand those numbers. And so that's why I think it's important that individuals like us, we help them to understand the ROI in investing in leadership development and training and coaching.
Yeah, it's you can frame coaching and leadership development as costs, but it's better to think of it as an investment in employee retention,
Yes.
in upskilling managers and executives as well as employees in the soft skills and the hard skills they need to succeed in their positions.
No question about it. No question about it. And focusing on those soft skills is so important. I think that's the part that the leaders that I work with, those are the areas where they struggle with the most. I had someone contact me the other day and told me I need an executive coach because where I struggle the most is in those soft skills in communicating. I communicate with my team, but the way that I communicate, at least based on the feedback that the team members are giving this leader, is not effective. It's creating barriers between this particular leader and their teams. And so this leader was honest. I'm doing well. I'm meeting my goals and I'm exceeding in the position, but this is where I struggle.
And that's good that they were being honest about it.
Yes.
Too often
Self-awareness.
too often we get folks who aren't honest with themselves. It's like the old question, "Are you a good driver?" And more than half the population will say they're a good driver when the reality is some of them are going to be in the lower half of the population.
Yes.
And same thing applies with, management, leadership, communication. We want to think we're better than we are. And that drives us back to your point about being realistic.
Yes. Yeah. And it's interesting that you bring that up, Bill, because when you say we think we're better than we are, that's really where emotional intelligence comes into
Mhm.
play. That's where understanding really who we are, what makes us tick, what are our triggers. Though understanding those things help people to improve their relationships. And I'll just say this, one of the tools that I use in my coaching business is the DISC profile. If you're familiar with that, there's so many personality assessments out there, but I specifically use DISC as well as a 360 assessment. And DISC helps not only leaders, but individuals in particular to understand their communication style, their collaboration style. It helps them to understand, okay, if I'm a D, which stands for dominance, and I'm dealing with someone who is an S style, primary S style, which is the S styles resist change and they also resist individuals. They have a hard time working with individuals who are very dominant. So if I have two individuals working together, the boss, the manager, the supervisor is a D, and the employee is an S, and the D supervisor is frustrated and confused as to why am I having so many problems with this S style? Well, once we go through the DISC assessment and profile and help that D style leader to understand how their communication style is not working with that S style, and then we begin to help them to, massage and to change how they're communicating. And then they realize, okay, if I change my style with this individual, I can create better collaboration. I can get what I need out of this individual because now I'm meeting their needs and understanding how to best communicate with them. And then the relationship then improves.
And meeting needs and improving communication, big pieces to emphasize in leadership development and in coaching.
Absolutely.
Let's turn our attention to something that HR professionals do that employees and managers sometimes misinterpret, and that is, protecting the organization. And as HR professionals, we need to do that, but we also need to build the trust, credibility, and strong relationships with employees and leaders. How can HR professionals balance
Yeah.
those two stats?
Yeah. I think one of the biggest misconceptions that individuals have, and I would say particularly employees, is that HR is so focused on protecting the organization at the expense of the employees. But that's not HR's job. HR's job is to balance risk, right? HR professionals have to make sure that they are balancing risk, but also supporting employees. And so I think, transparency, communication, honesty, integrity, being upfront with employees, confidentiality, that's a big one, Bill. I've seen that. And as it relates to confidentiality, it really hurts my heart when I hear employees, and I've heard it too often than I care to admit. When I hear employees say, I don't trust HR, or they'll tell other employees, don't go to HR because, they're not trustworthy. That really hurts my heart as an HR professional. And so I look at that and I say, what is it that we as HR professionals are doing that makes employees not trust us? And so we have to balance those things. We have to be honest, but we also have to be fair. And I think that that's another area as well. So if a manager, for instance, brings a concern to HR should not automatically assume that the manager is right. They shouldn't automatically assume that the manager is wrong either. But what HR's job is to discover the truth, to discover wherein lies the truth. And so if the manager needs some coaching and development to provide that, but if the employee needs coaching as well, to provide that. And so bringing the two sides together to create, greater understanding versus I've had situations where a manager came to my office when I was a practitioner with a write up already in hand. It was already written out and said, I want to give this to this employee. Well, have you spoken with the employee? I would ask. Well, no, but I want to give this write up. Okay, well, so then HR, instead of saying, okay, well, go ahead and administer the write up, talk with the manager, find out, okay, what has led to this point? Have you spoken with with the employee? And coach that manager to have that conversation with the employee before they administer the disciplinary action. Does it make sense? So it's like, don't go in with a punitive disciplinary approach first. Coach the manager to take more of a coaching manager or consultative approach with the employee. Coach the manager to become curious and to ask questions. Well, what is affecting your performance? How can I best support you? Asking those types of questions before they go in, again, with a disciplinary action. So, again, back to your question, I think those are ways that HR can balance risk while not appearing that they are overly supportive of managers or overly supportive of employees.
Yeah. And it's a delicate balance to maintain.
It is. Yes.
That brings to mind even a broader piece that we look at as HR professionals, and that's complicated workplace challenges. How should we be coaching leaders through these challenges, and what sort of approaches work well?
Yes. I think it starts off with, first of all, and I'll just say this, providing offering a leadership development program, first of all, where you're preparing leaders, you're providing with them with tools and resources, you're providing them with opportunities to safely practice having difficult conversations. I think that is extremely important. On top of that, as managers and leaders are bringing issues to HR, again, coaching them on how to have these conversations. One of the areas that I find that leaders struggle with the most is having difficult conversations. So we should be providing those tools and resources. For instance, a sample script for having a difficult conversation, coaching them on how to have that conversation, perhaps even role playing with them on having that difficult conversation so that they feel equipped, they feel confident. A lot of times leaders avoid these conversations, number one, because they're not prepared. They haven't been coached or developed on how to have those conversations. But also they feel unprepared. So they go into these conversations just kind of off the hip, off the cuff, and they're not prepared. But we coach them. We provide that safe environment again to role play and to coach them as they're going through it to help build their confidence.
Hmm. And role play does help. I'm a big believer in prior preparation.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. And that's what I was referring to, providing them with scripts.
Mhm.
I'm a big believer. I tell people, in my trainings, I often ask, how many of you have ever gone into a difficult conversation and prior to that conversation, in your mind, you thought about everything that you were going to say. I mean, you had it down to a T, but you didn't write anything down. You didn't practice it. You rehearsed it. You just kind of thought about it and you said, okay, well, when I speak with this person, I'm going to say this, and that. And then you get into that conversation with that person and everything you thought about left. You can't remember a single thing that you said that you told yourself that you were going to say to that person. And most hands go up. And my hand also goes up because I've been in that situation where I thought about it, but I didn't write it down. I didn't rehearse it. And so what I then tell them is you need to practice, you need to rehearse. Write down what it is that you're going to say, whether you bullet point it, whether you provide yourself with some key points that you want to make sure that you cover in that conversation. But preparation is key. If you fail to prepare, plan to fail.
Mhm. Very much so. Very much so. Is that something that we need to rethink in terms of leadership or workplace culture? Or is there a bigger challenge that we need to address and rethink?
You know, I think that one of the biggest challenges that I see is with culture. I once heard someone say that culture is defined by the worst behaviors that you tolerate. I'm going to repeat that because when I first heard it, it really hit me. They said culture is defined by the worst behaviors that a leader is willing to tolerate. So we often in organizations have mission statements and value statements. And, we tell people that this is how you are expected to act. And that's great. But what really determines culture, what people really understand, defines what is acceptable is what is allowed. So the conversations that people are allowed to have, the behaviors that people are allowed to engage in. If someone, loses their temper and yells at their team members in a staff meeting, or, if someone says something inappropriate to a coworker and those behaviors go unaddressed, that defines the culture. Don't tell me, we have a culture of respect but you allow employees to disrespect each other,
Mhm.
right? Don't tell me you have a healthy culture, but you have employees who are being demeaned and belittled by their leader, and that behavior is allowed. So I think that that's one of the biggest areas of opportunity in a lot of organizations is really getting clear about what is our true culture and looking at it from the perspective of what do we allow that we need to immediately stop? What behaviors do we want to see repeated? Those are the behaviors that need to be applauded. So when we see someone engaging in our values, as we say, treating people with respect, treating people with kindness, and we see people doing those things, we need to applaud those things. We need to recognize those things. And when we see people acting outside of our values, then we need to bring correction immediately and not allow those behaviors. So again, I truly believe, and I say this a lot, that culture is truly defined by the things that we allow.
That's a really good point. The things that we allow turn into the floor, the baseline behavior. And what we could be doing is being aspirational and encouraging the things we value, the things we want to see in an organization and from its members.
Absolutely.
And that leads me to another question. Are there leadership capabilities that you think organizations have to strengthen right now in order to be successful?
Absolutely. I think going back to one of the earlier questions, I think one of the biggest is communication.
Mhm.
Throughout my career, I have worked with leaders, have coached leaders who really struggle with communication. They struggle with communicating expectations. They struggle with communicating with employees when there needs to be correction. They struggle with just simply communicating information to employees. Here's a great example. I see this a lot when an organization is going through a change initiative, that's not the time to pull back on communication, right? That's
Mhm.
not the time to start withholding information. But I see that in some organizations where leaders, they just don't communicate. And what I have found is when leaders don't communicate, their team members fill in the blanks,
Mhm.
right? So when you fail to communicate information, people create their own stories,
Yes.
and so the way to, you know, dissuade that is simply by giving them information, communicating. So I think that's one of the biggest competencies that needs to be strengthened. I think another area that I see is emotional intelligence, being self aware. I'll share an example with you. So I was once coaching a leader who their executive leader contacted me and asked me to coach this individual. And so one of the things that I did was I met with this individual's, this leader's team members to just kind of get a sense of, how they experience this leader on a daily basis. And so a couple of the questions that I asked, one of the questions was, tell me about this leader's strengths. Another question I asked was, what would you say are this leader's opportunities for growth? And by and large, most of the employees talked about how this leader communicated. They said that this leader was demeaning, dismissive, that when the team members would raise a question, this leader got very defensive and assumed that they were challenging the leader's authority. And so the leader, was very disrespectful, would tell their employees, be quiet, those types of things. And when I presented this data to this leader to say, this is the information that, I got from your team members, this leader, Bill, I'm not making this up, seemed to be totally oblivious, was shocked, seemingly was shocked at this feedback. Did it, communicated to me that she didn't know where this was coming from. Now, was she being genuine? Perhaps not. But regardless of whether she realized how she was coming across, she lacked that emotional intelligence. She lacked the inability, or she lacked the ability, excuse me, to read the room, as I say. I always tell people you need to read the room. So when you are telling people to be quiet in a team meeting, are you looking at their expressions? Are you looking at their body language? Are you reading how they are responding to you? And, are you self-aware? Are you reflecting upon, okay, I had this interaction with this employee. Are you then going back and reflecting, okay, what went right during that interaction? What could I have done better? How did I come across to this employee? And so I think that, again, those are the two biggest leadership competencies that I think need the most attention. That's just my personal opinion. But communication and emotional intelligence are those areas I would say.
And, and I'm pleased that in our discussion, those two areas have come out among the items that we've covered today. One more question. If you could redesign human resources from scratch, what would you do?
Knowing what I know today, I would ensure that HR was set up in such a way that it was strategic from the outset. When I first started in HR 30 years ago, my initial experience and impression was we were responsible for pushing paper. We were responsible for managing employee relations issues and just, answering questions, making sure that people had their benefits and all of those things. And though while important, obviously, over the course of my career, I've obviously come to understand and function in this capacity that what organizations really need are strategic partners. They need individuals who understand the business. They need individuals who can speak the language of the business. And early on in my career, that was something that was never taught to me. It was never emphasized. Well, you need to understand the language of the business, but that is what is really needed in order for us to assist organizations with strategic planning, with succession planning, with retention, with recruiting the right people for the right jobs. All of those things, those are the strategic aspects of HR that we can help the organizations that we work for, and they will respect HR and they will value HR when we can consult with our leaders and help them to navigate, difficult employee situations and come out on the other side with a win. They begin to respect HR. So that's how I would redesign HR. I would also, in the age that we're in now, introduce AI as well to make it more technologically advanced within HR. So I know I'm fast forwarding 30 years, But when I look at the landscape of HR, those are really the skills and the competencies that are needed with HR professionals. So that's how I would redesign it. If I could go back into the future, that's what I would do to redesign HR.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that perspective. Any closing thoughts for our audience, Sheila?
Would just like to say that I love I absolutely love it. That's why I've spent, my entire career in HR. I believe in HR. In fact, I just spent 7 days on an HR cruise where I was one of the speakers. I'm still very much entrenched in the field of HR, and I think that we add a lot of value to organizations. And what we need to do is to make our value known. That
Mhm.
we need to have that seat at the table. We need to be courageous in speaking up. We need to understand the business. We need to be prepared to advise our leaders and really demonstrate our worth. And I know that HR, we have value. We just need to show it. And so with my closing words, I just want to encourage you all to keep doing what you're doing, keep growing, keep developing, never ever stop developing yourself. Be willing to get out there, attend conferences, your local SHRM chapters, get involved. Don't just, do the day-to-day stuff, but really be engaged. And we can take this field of HR to the next level.
Very good. Sheila Eason, thanks for being our guest today on The Perfect Route. It's wonderful having you here.
Yes. And Bill, if I could offer one other thing, please follow me on social media, particularly LinkedIn, Sheila Eason. I also have a website, elevatepeoplesolutions.com. If you are in need of any support, if you are a HR leader yourself and you say, hey, I'd love to have an executive coach to help me to develop my HR career, please feel free to give me a call. Thank you.
Great. And I hope our viewers and listeners do just that. And for all of you out there in podcast land, I look forward to having you as in the audience as we take another step soon on The Perfect Route.